Welcome back. In this video, we're going to prepare our game for mobile. So let's say my mouse is here in the center. You can see I'm not moving my mouse, but it's still destroying all of the fruits. And that is something that I would like to avoid, because on a mobile phone, when you're not touching the screen, you want to make sure that nothing will happen, but it will still think that your mouse or your finger is at the same spot where it was the moment you last touched the screen. So what we want to do is we want to only activate the blade, and more specifically the circle collider of the blade. We only want to activate it when we are moving the mouse. So if the mouse has moved a certain amount of space within a certain time frame. So let's say within 1 second, or let's say half a second, only if it moved, I don't know, like this amount. So let's say a 50th of the screen width or so. If that happens, then we will register that as a mouse movement or a finger movement. And in that time, we're going to activate our circle collider. And in the other times, we're going to deactivate it. So when we deactivate the circle collider, it will not cut anything. Okay, so let me deactivate it and run the game. And you will see that it will not destroy anything. Now let me activate it, and you can see now I can destroy things. Now let me deactivate it, and you can see I cannot destroy things. So that's what the circle collider does for us, of course. So let's fix that problem, as I was saying, inside of the blade script. So we will need a couple of variables. First of all, we need to have a public variable, which we can define will be the minimum velocity that we want to have for a movement to be registered as a real movement. Because if it's lower than that, then we will say, okay, this is not going to be considered as a movement in our game. Okay, so I'm going to use a float here. I'm going to call this one min velocity, and let's set that to a tenth, so 0.1 f. Then I will need a couple of private variables. So for example, I need to know the last mouse position. So I'm going to get a 3D vector here, last mouse pose. Then I need to have a vector 3, which will be the mouse velocity, so the direction of the mouse. And then I finally need to have the collider. So here, collider 2D, which will be the collider that we want to activate or deactivate, as I just stated. Okay, so in the awake method, we can now go ahead and assign the collider. We can get that by using the getComponent method and getting the collider 2D from our blade. Okay, because this blade script is owned by our blade game object, and this blade game object owns a circle collider component as well. So now we can go ahead and use this collider. Okay, so let's actually use it. Therefore, I will prepare a helper method. So this method, the only thing that it should do is it should return true if the mouse is moving, and it should return false if the mouse is not moving. And by moving, I mean in the sense that we have defined as a movement. So if it moved a certain width or height in a certain period of time, so a certain distance in our display. Okay, so let's create a method that will return a boolean, and I'm going to call this one is mouse moving. And here we will first of all need to get the current mouse position. So current mouse position will be the position of the transform component. Okay, so now we can calculate how much it traveled. So here we can just say traveled, which will be the last mouse position minus the current mouse position. And here we're going to use the magnitude for this. Okay, so how that is going to work is we need to surround this last mouse position and the current mouse position, because it will be a vector 3, and vector 3 has this property called magnitude, which returns the length of this vector. Okay, so we want to know how long is this vector, and this will be stored in this traveled variable. And now we can make sure that our last mouse position will be the current mouse position. Okay, we're overwriting it for the next iteration of this call. So when this method is going to be called, because now we can go ahead and check if we traveled a certain distance. So if we traveled more than the min velocity, we will return true. And otherwise, we will return false. So here, return false. Actually, we don't even need those brackets here, but it's fine. So now this is going to be our isMouseMoving, which will basically just get the current position, and then it will calculate how much the mouse has moved since the last time this method was called. So it does that by using the last mouse position minus the current mouse position. So the last mouse position, if you look at it here, it is going to be a vector 3, and by default, this vector 3 will be 0, 0, 0. Okay. Now, at the next moment, the last mouse position, we used it already for the calculation. So we can just override it with our current mouse position, because in the next iteration of this call, the current mouse position will be the last mouse position, because at that point we will have moved again potentially, right? So that's why we override it here. And then we can double check that we travel more distance than our min velo is. So here it is, min velo, which we defined as 0.1. So you can see we didn't use a vector, we just used a float here, which is a lot easier because we just say, okay, did it move a certain length in the 3D world? So that's what we're checking here. And if it did, then return true, otherwise return false. Because if it did, then we know that we traveled more than the minimum velocity that we have defined, and we will consider this as isMouseMoving. So now what we can do is, in the update method, we can basically just use our collider and enable it based on our isMouseMoving method. So we can just say, if it's moving, enable the collider. If it's not moving, disable the collider. Because this enabled, as you see here, is a boolean. So it will be either true or false. And now, by using this isMouseMoving method, we will get a boolean, which will return either true or false. And that's exactly what we needed. So that's actually perfect. All right, and now if we test this, depending on the PC that you're running this on, you will run into a problem, because you see here the circle collider, even if I'm moving, it's not constantly active, because the thing is, like, I have too many frames per second. So I have probably like 300, 400, 500 frames per second in this very simple game, because I'm running it on a very powerful machine. So we can fix this in multiple different ways. The easiest would probably be to call this collider enabled inside of a fixed update method. Okay, so instead of setting the blade to mouse and the collider enabled inside of the update method, we can put it up in the fixed update method, which will fix it to 50 frames per second. Alternatively, what we could also do is we could set the target frame rate inside of our awake method here to, let's say, something like 60. Okay, so this would be another way to set it up. So I'm going to use the fixed update method, which will be called not every frame, but it will be called a fixed amount of time, in our case 50, as that is the default. So let's save this script. Let's go back to our game, and now let's test it. All right, so there we are. Let's go over to the blade. Let's see. So you can see here, it's deactivated. Once I'm moving and inside of the screen, it is active, and otherwise it's inactive. Okay, so here, let me not move my mouse and let some fruit fly through. You can see the fruits are flying through, nothing happens. And then if I now move my mouse again, then things are working again. So here, let's go over to the blade, and you can see it's being only activated while my mouse is moving. All right, that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching it. See you in the next one.